Well, I guess they're letting just about anyone up here these days. That one sentence, whispered like a venomous secret in the hushed quiet of a first-class cabin, was all it took. It was aimed at Marcus Thorne, a brilliant CEO and a loving single father holding his 6-year-old daughter's hand. The woman who said it, Caroline Hayes, thought she was just protecting her privileged little bubble. She had no idea she wasn't just starting an argument. She was lighting the fuse on a multi-million-dollar bomb that would crater her own life, ground an entire airline, and prove that the cost of casual racism can be calculated down to the last devastating cent. Stick around to hear how one man's dignity forced an entire industry to its knees. The air in the Aerovista flagship lounge at JFK Terminal 8 had a specific scent, a mixture of expensive leather, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint, clean perfume of people who didn't have to worry about the cost of things. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Sentinel Cybernetics, breathed it in, a familiar aroma of a life he had built from nothing. But today it felt different, thinner. He wasn't just Marcus Thorne, keynote speaker for the world's largest cybersecurity conference. He was Daddy, and the small hand in his belonged to the most important person in his world, 6-year-old Vivian. Her bright pink headphones, shaped like cat ears, were clamped over her head, muffling the lounge's decorous hum. She was engrossed in a drawing app on her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration as she meticulously colored a unicorn's mane a shade of shimmering rainbow. Marcus smiled, a deep, genuine expression that softened the sharp, intelligent lines of his face. He debated bringing her on this trip to Las Vegas, but after 3 back-to-back business trips, the thought of another week without her felt like a physical ache. His late wife, Isabel, had always insisted, "Your work is what you do, Marcus. Vivian is who you are." He held that mantra close. He wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a simple black t-shirt, custom-made jeans, and a pair of pristine Oliver Cabell sneakers. It was his uniform, comfortable, understated, but undeniably expensive. It was the uniform of a man who wrote the code, not the man who wore the suit. He looked at his watch, a handsome IWC pilot's watch, a gift from his board after Sentinel landed its first major government contract. Time to board. "All right, my little Picasso," he said softly, touching her shoulder. "Time to go fly." Vivian looked up, her dark eyes wide and bright. "Are we really sitting at the front, Daddy? With the beds?" "The pods with the beds," he confirmed with a grin. "And they have unlimited ice cream sundaes." Her gasp of pure, unadulterated joy was the only currency he truly cared about. As they approached Gate 42, the stratified society of air travel was on full display. The long, snaking line for general boarding was already forming. The shorter, more sedate line for Priority Group 1 was just beginning to stir. Marcus and Vivian stepped into it, and that's when he felt the first flicker of it. A gaze that wasn't merely a glance, but an assessment, a judgment. It came from a woman a few feet ahead of them. She was in her late 50s with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a crisp linen pantsuit that screamed resort collection, and a face tightened by what looked like a standing appointment with a dermatologist. She held a Louis Vuitton carry-all like a shield. She looked back at Marcus, then at Vivian, then at the Group 1 sign, and then back at Marcus. Her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Marcus recognized the look. He'd seen it 1,000 times. It was the look that questioned his presence in a space he'd more than earned the right to occupy. He met her gaze, held it for a beat, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was his standard response. "I'm here. I see you. Get over it." The woman turned to her husband, a portly man with a flushed face and a golf shirt straining at the buttons. She whispered something to him, and he glanced back, his expression more bovine and confused than malicious. He shrugged and turned back toward the gate. When the agent called for first-class passengers to board, the woman, Caroline Hayes, as her boarding pass would later reveal, made sure to step directly in front of Marcus, creating a physical barrier. As she handed her ticket to the gate agent, she let out a theatrical sigh. "Thank goodness," she said, her voice loud enough for Marcus and several others to hear. "The lines are just getting so dreadfully long, and so mixed." The gate agent, a young man named Ben with tired eyes, offered a practiced, non-committal smile and scanned her pass. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Hayes." Marcus stepped forward, handing Ben his and Vivian's passes. Ben scanned them. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thorne. And you too, young lady. I hear the Sundays on Flight 7112 are top-notch." Vivian beamed. "I'm going to have sprinkles." "The best choice," Ben said with a genuine smile. As they walked down the jet bridge, Marcus could feel Caroline Hayes' eyes on his back. He ignored it, focusing on Vivian, who was peppering him with questions about cloud shapes and wing flaps. Their seats, 2A and 2B, were magnificent cocoons of privacy and luxury. Polished wood-grain finishes, plush leather that reclined into a fully flat bed, and a personal minibar stocked with sparkling water and juices. Vivian immediately began exploring every button and compartment with forensic intensity. Marcus stowed their carry-ons in the overhead bin and settled in, the familiar pre-flight ritual a comforting routine. A flight attendant named Heather, with a warm but slightly frazzled smile, came by to offer pre-departure beverages. "Champagne, Mr. Thorne? I'd love one. And an orange juice for my daughter, please." "Of course." As Heather turned to leave, a voice sharp and laced with saccharine condescension cut through the cabin's calm. "Excuse me, flight attendant." It was Caroline Hayes from seat 3D across the aisle. She was leaning out, craning her neck to see Marcus and Vivian. Heather walked over to her. "Yes, ma'am. Can I get you something?" Caroline didn't lower her voice. She wanted an audience. She looked past Heather, directly at Marcus, and delivered the line that would change everything. "Well," she said with a dry, mirthless chuckle, "I guess they're letting just about anyone up here these days." The words hung in the air, thick and ugly. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Marcus felt a familiar, hot spike of anger in his chest, but he immediately smothered it. He would not, could not, lose his composure in front of his daughter. He looked at Vivian, who was thankfully oblivious, headphones back on, humming to herself. He simply turned his head, met Caroline Hayes' smug gaze, and held it. He didn't scowl. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his expression a cold, blank wall. He let the silence and the full weight of her statement sit on her. Her smirk faltered for a second, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes before she tossed her blonde hair and turned away, as if dismissing him. Heather, the flight attendant, looked mortified. She hurried back with the drinks, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the console. "I am so sorry about that, sir," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all right," Marcus said, his voice even. "I didn't hear anything." It was a lie, and they both knew it. It was a dismissal of the woman, a refusal to give her words power. But the peace was already broken. The scent of espresso and leather was gone, replaced by the stale odor of prejudice. The flight hadn't even left the ground, and the turbulence had already begun. The cabin door was secured with a resounding thud, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, a smooth, practiced baritone announcing their flight time to Las Vegas. Marcus took a sip of his champagne, the cold fizz doing little to cool the simmering heat in his gut. He tried to focus on Vivian, who was explaining the intricate social hierarchy of the cartoon ponies on her screen. He answered her questions, his voice calm, but his mind was elsewhere. It was replaying Caroline Hayes' comment, the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that his blackness made his presence in this space an anomaly, a charity case, a mistake. He knew the statistics. He'd read the reports. A 2020 ProPublica investigation had exposed how the TSA's behavior detection program, for years, had disproportionately targeted racial minorities. He knew from experience that flying while black was a unique ordeal, a gauntlet of extra scrutiny, from security lines to the boarding gate. He'd once been randomly selected for additional screening 3 times on a single round-trip flight. He'd learned to navigate it with a kind of detached, weary grace, a performance of non-threatening compliance designed to get him from point A to point B with minimal friction. But this felt different. This wasn't the institutional bureaucratic bias of a security checkpoint. This was personal, targeted, and public. And his daughter was here. The incident seemed to have passed. Heather was making her final checks. Then Caroline Hayes unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She was holding a bottle of Fiji water. As she moved into the aisle, she made a show of stumbling, lurching towards Marcus and Vivian's pod. "Oh my goodness!" she exclaimed as water sloshed from her bottle, splashing onto the carpet just inches from Vivian's feet. Vivian flinched, pulling her legs up onto the seat. "Watch it," Marcus said, his voice sharp and instinctive. Caroline straightened up, a look of mock horror on her face. "Oh, I am so sorry. It's just... I felt a little unsteady. A bit... crowded." She looked pointedly at Marcus. Heather rushed over with a handful of napkins. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're about to push back." "I will," Caroline said, dabbing at the non-existent water on her pantsuit. "But I have to be honest, Heather. I'm feeling a little... uncomfortable. A little unsafe." Heather paused, her professional smile faltering. "Unsafe, ma'am? Why is that?" Caroline leaned in, but kept her voice loud enough to carry. "Well, that man," she gestured with her head towards Marcus, "was very aggressive towards me at the gate. And now, I just have a feeling, I can't explain it. I think for the safety and security of this cabin, you should probably verify that he is meant to be here." The accusation was so audacious, so patently false, that for a moment Marcus was speechless. He saw the game she was playing. She was weaponizing the language of security, turning his very existence into a potential threat. Heather was caught. She was a mid-career flight attendant for a legacy carrier. She knew the rules. Rule number 1, de-escalate. Rule number 2, never ignore a passenger's security concern, no matter how flimsy. Ignoring it could cost you your job. "Sir," Heather said, turning to Marcus, her face pleading, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but would you mind just showing me your boarding pass again?" This was the first request. It was humiliating, but Marcus knew the tightrope Heather was walking. He also knew that refusing would only escalate the situation in Caroline's favor. For Vivian, he had to stay calm. He took a slow breath, reached into his blazer, and pulled out his phone, displaying the QR code. "Here you go, Heather." Heather scanned it with her service device. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Everything is perfectly in order." She turned back to Caroline. "Ma'am, as you can see, this is Mr. Thorne's assigned seat. He is a first-class passenger." Caroline wasn't done. She had the scent of blood, of a perceived victory. "A boarding pass can be faked," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "I read an article about these sophisticated fraud rings. People use stolen identities to fly in luxury. They could be anyone." The sheer, unadulterated racism of the statement was breathtaking. The implication was clear. The only way a black man could be in first class was if he were a criminal. A man in seat 1A, a white executive in a crisp suit, sighed audibly. "Oh, for God's sake, lady, leave the man alone. We all want to get to Vegas." Caroline shot him a venomous look. "I'm concerned about my safety. It's my right to feel safe." She turned back to Heather, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I insist you check his government identification. Match it to the name on the ticket. It's standard procedure." It was not standard procedure. Not once a passenger was on the plane, but the magic words, safety and security, had been invoked again. Heather looked panicked. She knew this was wrong, but Caroline was relentless and was framing it in a way that made inaction seem negligent. "Sir," Heather began, her voice trembling, "I am so sorry. This is highly unusual, but the other passenger is insisting. Could I please see your driver's license?" The second request. The heat in Marcus's chest was now a roaring fire. He looked at Vivian. Her headphones were off now. She was watching, her small face a mixture of confusion and fear. She knew something was wrong. Her father, her hero, was being challenged, and she didn't understand why. That look on his daughter's face changed the equation. His strategy of calm compliance was failing. It wasn't protecting her. It was forcing her to witness his humiliation. But he wasn't at his breaking point. Not yet. He had one more move of de-escalation in him. He slowly, deliberately reached into his wallet and pulled out his California driver's license. He handed it to Heather. He didn't look at Caroline. He looked at the flight attendant, his gaze steady and hard. "Heather, this is the second time you've questioned my right to be on this plane, in this seat that I paid for. You have my boarding pass. You now have my government-issued ID. Are we done? Heather flushed with shame. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I apologize. She showed the ID to Caroline, holding it at a distance. See, ma'am? Marcus Thorne. It matches. Caroline squinted, then waved a dismissive hand. Fine. For now. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and pulled out her phone. She began filming, aiming the camera not directly at Marcus, but in his general direction, providing a running commentary to her husband in a loud whisper. I'm documenting this, Robert, just in case. The flight attendant seems nervous. The man is agitated. You just can't be too careful these days. Marcus had had enough. He pressed the call button. Heather appeared instantly. Heather, he said, his voice low and cold as steel. I want to speak to the purser or the captain. Now. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted from tense to toxic. The hum of the engines was a low growl beneath a blanket of suffocating silence. Every passenger was now acutely aware of the drama unfolding, some stealing furtive glances, others staring pointedly into their books or screens, wishing they could disappear. The purser, a stern-faced woman named Diane with over 30 years of service, arrived first. She had the unflappable air of someone who had seen everything, from mid-air births to engine failures. Heather quickly and nervously recounted the events, her voice hushed. Diane listened, her expression unreadable. She then turned to Marcus. Mr. Thorne, I'm Diane, the purser on this flight. I understand there's been a disturbance. A disturbance? Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. That's a very polite word for it. Your flight attendant, at the behest of that passenger, he nodded towards Caroline, who was now watching with undisguised glee, has asked me to prove my identity twice. I have been accused of being a fraud and a security threat in front of my 6-year-old daughter. Disturbance doesn't begin to cover it. This is targeted harassment. Diane's gaze flickered towards Caroline, a flicker of profound annoyance crossing her features. She knew exactly what this was. She'd dealt with passengers like Caroline Hayes before. I understand your frustration, sir, Diane said, her tone professional but firm. Mrs. Hayes has been reminded of the airline's code of conduct. I can assure you there will be no further interruptions. An assurance isn't enough, Marcus countered. What is being done about a passenger who is baselessly and repeatedly harassing another passenger? What is being done about a passenger who is filming me and my child right now? Diane looked over at Caroline, whose phone was still angled in their direction. Ma'am, you are not permitted to film other passengers without their consent. Please put your phone away. I am filming for my own protection, Caroline retorted, her voice shrill. I feel threatened. You will put the phone away now, or I will have you removed from this aircraft, Diane said, her voice dropping an octave. There was no negotiation in it. Muttering under her breath, Caroline lowered the phone. She had lost the purser, but she wasn't defeated. She was just recalibrating. She knew the ultimate authority lay elsewhere. I want to speak to the captain, Caroline demanded. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I have flown over 2 million miles with this airline, and I am being treated abysmally while my legitimate security concerns are ignored. Get the captain. Diane's jaw tightened. In for a penny, in for a pound. Invoking the captain was the nuclear option. It delayed the flight. It created a formal incident report. It took the situation out of the cabin crew's hands. Fine, Diane said, her patience clearly exhausted. She spoke into her handset. A few moments later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Frank Miller emerged. Captain Miller was the picture of authority. Tall, silver-haired, with a crisp pilot's uniform and an air of command. He surveyed the cabin, his eyes landing on the knot of people. Diane, Heather, and Marcus, with Caroline watching like a hawk from her seat. The flight was now officially delayed. The jet bridge was still attached. What's the issue here? Captain Miller asked, his voice calm but brooking no nonsense. Diane gave him the professional, sanitized version. Captain, we have a passenger dispute. Mrs. Hayes in 3D expressed a concern, and Mr. Thorne in 2A feels he is being harassed. Caroline saw her opening. She unbuckled again and stood up, positioning herself to address the captain directly. She switched her demeanor from aggressive to aggrieved, her voice taking on a tearful, shaky quality. Captain, she began, placing a hand on her chest. Thank you for coming. I am so relieved. I tried to tell your crew, but they wouldn't listen. I have a terrible feeling, Captain. This man, she pointed directly at Marcus, he was hostile from the moment we were at the gate. He has been glaring at me. I feel his aggression. My husband and I, we fly first class all the time, and we've never experienced this. There's something wrong here. I asked your flight attendant to simply verify his identity for my own peace of mind, and she was reluctant. I am afraid, for myself, for my husband, for everyone on this plane. It was a masterful performance, a symphony of weaponized white fragility. She had painted herself as the victim and Marcus as the aggressor, his quiet dignity twisted into silent menace. Captain Miller looked at Marcus. Marcus met his gaze. He didn't say a word. He refused to engage in the theatrics. He simply sat there, a portrait of stillness, with his daughter tucked protectively under his arm. The captain turned to Marcus. Sir, what is your side of the story? Marcus finally spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used when closing a billion-dollar deal, the voice that stripped away all rhetoric and left only facts. Captain, my side is simple. My daughter and I boarded this plane and took our assigned seats. That woman, he gestured calmly, announced to the cabin that she was surprised people like me were allowed in first class. She then accidentally spilled water on the floor next to my child. She then lied to your flight attendant, claiming I was aggressive and a security risk. She has compelled your crew to demand my boarding pass and my driver's license. She has filmed my child. Now she is lying to you. Those are the facts. The truth is, that woman is a racist, and your crew, while trying to do their jobs, has allowed her racism to disrupt this flight and humiliate me in front of my daughter. Now, are you going to do your job and remove the disruptive passenger, or are we going to continue this farce? The cabin was dead silent. The word racist hung in the air, a stark and unavoidable charge. Captain Miller was in an impossible position. On one hand, a hysterical, high-value diamond medallion passenger making security claims. On the other, a calm, articulate man making a credible accusation of harassment. The captain's priority was singular: get the plane off the ground. He saw a path, a shortcut to de-escalation, a way to placate everyone and end the drama. It was a path paved with good intentions and disastrous ignorance. He turned to Marcus, his face a mask of what he thought was reasonable authority. Sir, I hear you. I understand your frustration. Believe me, I just want to get this resolved so we can all be on our way. He gave Marcus a placating smile. So look, how about this? To put this whole ugly matter to rest for everyone, once and for all, could you just do me a favor and show me your identification one last time? Then we can close the book on this and get in the air. The third request. From the captain, it was the final straw. It was the moment Marcus's meticulously controlled calm shattered. It wasn't a request for a favor. It was a demand for his submission. It was the airline, in the form of its highest authority on the vessel, siding with the aggressor. They were telling him that his dignity was less important than her comfort, that his word was less valuable than her lie, that the price of peace was his public humiliation. He looked from the captain's expectant face to Caroline Hayes's triumphant smirk. And then he looked at Vivian. Her face was buried in his side, her little shoulders shaking. She was crying. Something inside Marcus Thorne snapped. The patient father, the compliant passenger, the de-escalating professional, they all vanished. In their place stood the CEO of Sentinel Cybernetics, a man who built a global security empire on one principle. You never, ever reward bad actors. You identify the vulnerability, you isolate the threat, and you eliminate it. He slowly shook his head. His voice, when it came, was no longer quiet. It was clear, resonant, and echoed with absolute authority. No, he said. Captain Miller blinked. I'm sorry? No, Marcus repeated, standing up to his full height. He was taller than the captain, and at that moment, he seemed to fill the entire cabin. I will not be showing you, or anyone else, my identification again. I am the victim here. That woman is the aggressor, and you have just made your choice. You have chosen to validate her racist harassment. You have failed as a captain. Your crew has failed, and this airline has failed. He pulled his state-of-the-art smartphone from his pocket. So here's what's going to happen now, Marcus announced, his voice ringing with cold finality. This plane will not be going to Las Vegas. It will not be moving from this gate. In fact, I think it's best if we all deplane and you find another way to your destination. He unlocked his phone, his thumb hovering over a single name in his contacts, a name that Captain Miller would soon learn to fear more than a flock of geese in a jet engine. You had a choice, Captain, Marcus said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. You made the wrong one. He pressed the call button. The name on Marcus's screen simply read, David Chen. To Captain Miller, the name meant nothing. To Marcus, it meant everything. David Chen was not some anonymous customer service representative. He was the chief operating officer of Aerovista Airlines. He was also a man Marcus had spent a grueling 72 hours with in a war room in London 2 years prior, when a hostile state actor tried to breach Aerovista's entire booking and logistics network. It was Marcus's company, Sentinel Cybernetics, that had repelled the attack. It was Marcus who had personally identified the exploit and written the patch that saved Aerovista from a catastrophe that would have cost them billions and grounded their global fleet. The contract between Sentinel and Aerovista was not just for software. It was a deep strategic partnership. And buried deep in the 300-page agreement in Section 12, Subclause B, was a paragraph Marcus himself had insisted upon. The Brand Integrity and Partner Conduct Clause. It stipulated that any action by an Aerovista employee or agent that brought the brand into disrepute or reflected discriminatory practices could trigger a penalty review up to and including immediate termination of the contract, a contract worth over $80 million a year to the airline. The phone picked up on the second ring. Marcus, it's 3 a.m. in London. This had better be a Category 5 cyber apocalypse. David's voice came through, thick with sleep but instantly alert. It's an apocalypse of a different sort, David, Marcus said, his voice level. He did not put the phone on speaker, but in the tomb-like silence of the cabin, his side of the conversation was perfectly audible. I'm on one of your flights, Aerovista 7112, JFK to Vegas. Or I should say, I was. There was a pause on the other end. What happened? I'll give you the short version, and my legal team will give you the long one tomorrow, Marcus said. I am sitting in first class with my 6-year-old daughter. I have been racially profiled, publicly harassed, and accused of being a criminal by another passenger. Your cabin crew and ultimately your captain, instead of addressing the aggressor, have chosen to repeatedly demand my identification as if I am the suspect. The captain just made the third and final demand. My daughter is in tears. This is not just a customer service complaint, David. This is a direct and flagrant violation of the Partner Conduct Clause in our agreement. The air went out of the cabin. Captain Miller's face, which had been a mask of authoritative annoyance, was rapidly draining of all color. He could hear the multi-million-dollar gears grinding to a halt. The name David Chen now registered with the force of a lightning strike. Tell me you're joking, Marcus. David's voice was now wide awake, laced with horror. Do I sound like I'm joking? Marcus looked directly at Captain Miller. The captain's name is Frank Miller. The flight is at Terminal 8, Gate 42. He seems to believe that placating a racist passenger is more important than the safety and dignity of a father and his child. He, and by extension, Aerovista, are about to learn a very expensive lesson in priorities. He continued, laying out his terms with the precision of a surgeon. Here is what I require, David, not request, require. 1. I want this aircraft returned to the gate and this flight canceled. Not delayed, canceled. The operational integrity has been compromised by the captain's poor judgment. 2. You will arrange for a private jet to take my daughter and me to Las Vegas within the next 3 hours. I have a keynote to deliver. 3. The passenger in seat 3D, Caroline Hayes, is to be permanently banned from this airline. 4. This entire crew, including the captain, is to be grounded pending a full investigation and mandatory, comprehensive anti-bias and de-escalation training. Sentinel will be happy to recommend a consultant. The final sentence was the killing blow, an offer of help that was really a declaration of power. Marcus, just stay on the plane. Don't move. I'm handling it, David said, the sound of frantic keyboard typing now audible in the background. I'll call you back in 2 minutes. Marcus hung up. He looked around the cabin. Every eye was on him. The man in 1A who had defended him was staring, his mouth slightly agape. Heather, the flight attendant, looked like she was about to be physically ill. Diane, the purser, had her hand over her mouth. And Caroline Hayes, her smug, triumphant expression had curdled into a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Her husband, Robert, was sweating profusely, whispering furiously at her. "What did you do, Caroline? What did you do?" Captain Miller stood frozen, a statue of obsolete authority. He started to say something. "Sir, let's not be hasty." But the words died in his throat. His personal handset buzzed violently in his pocket. He knew who it was. With a trembling hand, he answered it. He didn't speak. He just listened. His face went from pale to ashen. The blood drained from it so completely he looked like a ghost in a uniform. He listened for about 30 seconds. His only response a choked, "Yes, sir." He hung up the phone, his hand falling to his side as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked at Marcus, not with anger or authority, but with a look of pure, unadulterated shock, as if he were seeing a man who had just summoned lightning from a clear blue sky. He turned and walked stiffly to the cabin intercom, picking it up with the unsteady hand of a man who knew his career was over. His smooth, practiced captain's voice was gone, replaced by a strained, hollow monotone. "Ladies and gentlemen, ahem," he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. Due to an unforeseen and significant operational issue, this flight, Aerovista 7-12 to Las Vegas, has been canceled." A collective gasp went through the entire plane, followed by an immediate uproar. Cries of "What? And canceled? And you've got to be kidding me," echoed from the economy cabin. "We ask that you please remain seated as we return to the gate," the captain continued, his voice cracking. "Once we have docked, please gather your personal belongings and deplane in an orderly fashion. Aerovista agents at the gate will have information regarding rebooking." He dropped the handset into its cradle as if it were on fire. The significant operational issue was standing right in front of him, holding his daughter's hand. Chaos erupted. Passengers were on their feet, shouting questions, their Vegas vacation plans, business meetings and connections evaporating before their eyes. In the midst of the pandemonium, Caroline Hayes stood up, her face a grotesque canvas of rage and confusion. "Canceled?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "You canceled an entire flight because of him? This is insane. I'm a Diamond Medallion member." Marcus just looked at her, his expression cold and empty. He didn't need to say a word. The consequences were just beginning to rain down, and she was standing at the epicenter of the storm. The 10-yard journey back to the gate felt longer than the entire flight path to Las Vegas. The engines of the Airbus A321 whined down with a mournful sigh, a sound that seemed to perfectly capture the mood inside. From the economy and business class cabins behind the curtain, a cacophony of outrage grew, a rising tide of furious voices, crying children, and the frantic tapping of fingers on phones as 187 people simultaneously realized their plans had just been vaporized. But in the hushed, rarefied air of first class, a different kind of drama was reaching its chilling climax. Captain Frank Miller, a man who had been the picture of command just 30 minutes prior, stood limp and defeated near the cockpit door. His authority had evaporated, leaving behind the hollow shell of a uniform. He avoided looking at Marcus Thorne, whose stillness in seat 2A was now more commanding than any captain's uniform could ever be. Marcus was focused only on his daughter, Vivian, whispering reassurances, stroking her hair, creating an impenetrable bubble of calm in the very eye of the hurricane he had summoned. With a soft electronic beep and a final, jarring bump, the jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft. The cabin door hissed open, and the noise from the terminal, the general airport din, flooded in. But it was immediately silenced by the figures who stepped across the threshold. They were not passengers. They were emissaries of the corporate monolith that had been wounded. Two men in impeccably tailored dark suits, their faces devoid of emotion, their corporate ID badges gleaming like military insignia, boarded with purposeful strides. They were followed by a Port Authority police officer whose calm, watchful presence instantly amplified the gravity of the situation. The lead suit wearer, A man named Henderson with sharp features and cold, assessing eyes was the JFK station chief. He was the man who had to answer for this, and his fury was a palpable, refrigerated force. Henderson's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the scene with a glance. The shell-shocked crew, the stunned passengers, and finally Captain Miller. He walked directly to him, stopping a foot away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The venom was in the whisper. "Captain," Henderson began, his voice a low, serrated edge. "You had an aircraft full of paying customers. You had a flight plan. You had a destination. You no longer have any of those things. But what you do have, Captain, is a meeting with me, the FAA, and our General Counsel. You will hand over your wings and your ID to the first officer. You will be escorted to my office. You will not speak to anyone else. Am I understood?" Miller, his face the color of spoiled milk, could only manage a single, pathetic nod. His career, a 30-year ascent through the ranks, had just ended in a 10-second conversation on the floor of his own aircraft. He had been publicly stripped of his command in front of his crew, and the very man who had engineered his downfall. The second suit, a younger man with a more placid demeanor, approached Marcus's pod. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Mark from the Executive Services team. I am here to personally escort you and your daughter from this aircraft." His tone was one of profound, almost reverential respect. "We have the Blackbird VIP lounge prepared for you. It's completely private. A town car is waiting on the tarmac to take you directly to the private aviation terminal at Teterboro. We've chartered a Gulfstream G650 for you. The flight crew is on standby. It can be wheels up whenever you're ready." "Thank you, Mark," Marcus said, his voice even. The contrast was stunning and deliberate. To the captain who had failed, utter ruin. To the man who had been wronged, the full, awesome power of the corporation bending to his will. As Marcus gathered Vivian's small backpack and her tablet, he lifted her into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, exhausted by the emotional turmoil. He stood and turned to walk down the aisle, and it was then that he came face to face with Caroline and Robert Hayes. The moment of their reckoning had arrived. Caroline was on her feet, her face a contorted mask of disbelief and fury. "Well, this is an outrage," she was hissing at her husband. "He can't do this. Who does he think he is?" "The man who just canceled our flight, Caroline. The man who you decided to poke with a stick," Robert whispered back, his voice trembling with a frantic mixture of anger and terror. Henderson, his duty with the captain dispatched, turned his cold attention to them. The Port Authority officer took a half step forward, a silent, imposing presence. "Mrs. Caroline Hayes?" Henderson's voice was formal, stripped of all warmth. "Yes," she snapped, ready for a fight. "I want to file a formal complaint. I was threatened and harassed, and your captain did nothing." Henderson allowed a flicker of something that might have been a smile, but it was devoid of any humor. "On the contrary, Mrs. Hayes, we have already received formal complaints. They are against you." He held up a tablet, its screen glowing. "I have here preliminary statements from the passenger in seat 1A, the couple in 4B and 4C, and the gentleman in 2F. All of them corroborate Mr. Thorne's version of events. All of them describe your behavior as aggressive, unsolicited, and racially motivated. I also have the official logs from Purser Diane Ellison and Flight Attendant Heather Reed, detailing your repeated baseless accusations and your refusal to comply with crew instructions, which is a federal offense." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "You invoked safety and security. Well, Mrs. Hayes, you have single-handedly caused a multi-million-dollar operational failure and a Level 2 security incident for this airline. As such, under the binding terms of our conditions of carriage, which you agreed to when you purchased your ticket, your ability to travel with Aerovista, and I should add, our 26 global airline partners, is hereby revoked for life. You are permanently banned." The words hit Caroline like a physical blow. "Banned? For life? You can't do that. I am a Diamond Medallion member. 2 million miles. I know your CEO. Our CEO now knows you, Mrs. Hayes, and believe me, he is not pleased," Henderson countered icily. "Your status is irrelevant. Your miles will be forfeited." Robert Hayes, seeing his world of corporate perks and comfortable travel dissolving, finally stepped forward, trying to muster some semblance of authority. "Now see here," he started, puffing out his chest. "I am Robert Hayes, a senior partner at Covington Financial. I had nothing to do with this. My firm has one of your largest corporate accounts, the North American Platinum Fund. I think if you check your records—" Henderson cut him off so sharply it was as if he'd slapped him. "Sir, we already have Covington Financial, a most valued partner." He tilted his head. "And like all our valued corporate partners, your company has a strict ethics and conduct clause in your travel agreement with us. It states that employees and their families are expected to uphold the values of the firm when traveling on company business or using the corporate account. This incident, involving the harassment of another passenger, the public intoxication of prejudice, and the direct causation of significant brand and financial damage to your partner airline, seems to be a rather flagrant violation of that clause." Robert's face went from flush to the color of ash. He could see the email that would be waiting for him, the summons to the chief risk officer's office, the emergency meeting with the board. Covington Financial was a ruthless, image-obsessed machine. He hadn't just been adjacent to a scene, he had been a silent, complicit party to a PR disaster that would now be directly linked to his firm's name. "I will be forwarding a full detailed incident report to your head of corporate travel and your chief counsel by 1:00 a.m. tomorrow," Henderson continued, his voice like a surgeon's scalpel. "I am sure they will be most interested to learn how their senior partner's family trip resulted in a viral news story and a black eye for us all. Perhaps your ethics department can use it as a training seminar." At that moment, Marcus walked past them, with Vivian held tight in his arms. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He simply moved from the sphere of chaos into the quiet, protected world that awaited him. Caroline watched him go, her mouth agape, the full, horrifying scope of her miscalculation finally crashing down upon her. She had not been punching down at a social inferior. She had been punching up at a pillar of the very system she so desperately admired, and that pillar had just fallen directly on top of her. The karma, however, was just getting started. The consequences spread like a virus. The video of Caroline's final, shrieking outburst, filmed by the tech blogger in business class, hit the internet that evening. By morning, it had millions of views. The hashtags #Gate42Karen and our Aerovist Apocalypse were trending globally. She was identified within hours. Her real estate firm, Keller Williams Gold Coast, was inundated with thousands of emails and calls. Before noon, the managing broker called her. The conversation was brief. Her license was terminated, her listings were reassigned, and her profile was scrubbed from the website as if she had never existed. Their country club membership was suspended pending a conduct review. Lifelong friends suddenly stopped answering their calls. They were social lepers. For Robert, the fallout was less public, but more profound. He was called into a video conference the next morning with 3 of Covington's most senior partners. They didn't yell. They were cold, disappointed, and brutal. They spoke of reputational risk, brand contagion, and gross lapse in judgment. He was suspended without pay for 6 months and stripped of his lucrative position as head of the Platinum Fund. He was told that if he ever wanted to work at the firm again, it would be in a back-office role with no client contact. His career as a high-flying partner was over. Aerovista bled money and credibility. The immediate cost of the cancellation, passenger compensation, rebooking fees on rival airlines, overtime for ground staff, the charter of Marcus's private jet, totaled an estimated $1.2 million. Their stock took a 3.5% hit at market open, wiping out nearly $200 million in shareholder value. David Chen had to host an emergency press conference, issuing a humiliating public apology. The renewal of the Sentinel Cybernetics contract was, as he later described it, a hostage negotiation. Sentinel's price increased by 40%, and the brand integrity clause was expanded to 3 pages, with penalties so severe it effectively gave Marcus Thorne veto power over the airline's customer service policies. On the gleaming silent Gulf Stream, soaring high above the continent, Vivian was asleep, the trauma of the day finally giving way to exhaustion. Marcus looked down at her peaceful face, a stark contrast to the chaos he had unleashed. He felt no victory, only a hollow, aching sadness. This wasn't a win. It was a brutal, necessary course correction. He hadn't wanted to ruin lives or cost a company millions. He had simply wanted to be treated like a man, a father, a passenger who had paid his fare. He had been denied that basic dignity, and he had been forced to demonstrate in the most dramatic way possible that his dignity had a price, a very, very high price. He looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. He knew that one day he would have to explain to Vivian that the world holds an ugly side, but he would also teach her that you must never, ever let that ugliness define your worth or your place in it. You stand your ground, you know your value, and you never, ever let them make you feel small. The lesson had been costly, but as he held his daughter, safe and sound, he knew with a heavy heart that it had been worth every single cent. So there you have it. It wasn't just an argument. It was a collision of two worlds. The world of Caroline Hayes, built on a crumbling foundation of prejudice and entitlement, and the world of Marcus Thorne, built on merit, brilliance, and an unbreakable love for his child. In the end, it wasn't a private jet that defeated her. It was her own bigotry. The airline didn't cancel the flight because Marcus was powerful. They canceled it because her actions made her a liability they could no longer afford. This story is a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, there are no small acts of hatred. Every word, every action has a ripple effect, and sometimes those ripples become a tsunami. Marcus Thorne didn't seek revenge, he demanded respect. And in doing so, he held an entire corporation accountable, proving that while prejudice might be common, it doesn't have to be free. The karma in this story wasn't magic. It was a simple, brutal calculation of cause and effect. What do you think? Was the cancellation justified? What would you have done in Marcus's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down. Thanks for watching.